Welcome to Daredevil in the Details, a show that explores and dotes on the philosophy and themes of Netflix's Daredevil, a digression collection brought to you by A Method to the Madness and ZeroIndent. I'm author DC McNeil and media writer. I'm the editor-in-chief at ZeroIndent, and I'm joined, of course, by Patrick from A Method to the Madness. What's good, Pat? How you doing?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing good. How are you, David?
Man, you know, it's a very chill Sunday. Okay, I've poured myself a whiskey. All right, I've got the chill vibes on. I've got the chill vibes. I got a bottle of Speyside that I've been cooking with, and you know,
I was debating getting some whiskey.
Yeah,
but decided I'd rather be sober for this because you know I'm a lightweight. So
that's true. Pat has one whiskey and he's like, and now I'm drunk.
That's true. All my articulation just goes out the window.
Exactly. Look, I want to set the stakes for the show initially. I think a lot of people coming to this will, if you don't know who we are, I guess, you know, a lot of what we talk about is not just media crit and philosophy, but we're really invested in stories and their place in the not just the media landscape necessarily, but like the way that they help us shape and think about the world. You know, I made a podcast for like 6 or 7 years, Art for Artists, that was really about taking media that was popular or was in the kind of zeitgeist and then trying to extrapolate and understand what the mechanisms were behind the scenes, what the themes were and how they worked. A Method to the Madness is a show about films and philosophy that really explores how do we, you know, understand and relate to films. Obviously, me and Pat come from probably a more kind of classically academic slant to this stuff. I think is probably an understatement on my behalf, but definitely I think we're more on the arty kind of side of it than necessarily like the commercial side of it.
We're from the wanky side of it. Is translation.
Correct. Yes, we're from the big dorky pretentious side of it. Look, I want to set out a few kind of ground rules that I've started doing at you know, any new project I'm working on, any podcast in particular. You know, I would put together a bit of a mission brief of like, this is the kind of stuff we want to do. So I want to lay out some core values for the show. And then I want to, you know, get into what our experience is with Daredevil. I should say too, before I get into some of this. So, you know, we want to rewatch Daredevil. So this is a show where we're going to rewatch the Netflix TV show Daredevil, kind of work through each season in chunks. So at the end of each episode, we'll tell you which chunk we're watching next week. So you're able to kind of consume those at your own pace. You don't have to watch the show. We'll give you summaries and talk you through it. But you can watch along at home as well. And I guess what I'm hoping, you know, through this experience is by the time that the new Daredevil show comes out, which we'll probably consume as part of the show as well, I want us to kind of work through what Daredevil is about, and more specifically, you know, what makes it a show that I think for both of us is just stuck around. Like, I don't know about you, but like, it's one of those shows that if someone was like, what's one of your favorite shows of the last 10 years? This is pretty high on that list.
Yeah. Well, more so just the fact that it's like a superhero show, like from the MCU.
It's so surprising.
No less. Yeah. You know, not to... That sounds like I'm using the MCU as a pejorative, and that's something I want to sort of preface like right off the bat. Like, whenever I say shit like that, like I'm not using it as a pejorative. I'm like, when I say, you know, this is good for the MCU, I love the MCU, but you know, typically like these kind of films, I don't know how to describe it without, you know, causing offense, but like it's
I guess what we
save
should,
me, David.
Yeah, what we should say for now is that it is starkly different in tone and subject matter to a lot of the rest of the material that came out of the Marvel Studios during that time, and even to this day. You know, this is probably rivaled barely, you know, by things like, you know, the Guardians of the Galaxy films, particularly Guardians 2, which is very bleak, and of course, you know, the end of that Infinity War saga, which, you know, kind of gets to a dark place. But, you know, yeah, it's very different, I guess, is what we should say, instead of trying to accidentally start a fight. So let me,
I worded that horribly. I'm sorry.
No. It's a difficult thing to talk around. I'm often a lot more blunt about my opinion about the Marvel films. There are like 4 good ones that are really good, and the rest of them are perfectly fine. So a few values, I think, for this show. If you're interested in the way that we talk about things and you've come to us before, these won't be surprising. If this is your first time, this is something I'm trying to do with everything I make now. So a few of the core values that we're interested in exploring is that ideas are ambition, which is simply to say we want to think about the show and think about it deeply, and the kinds of ideas we come up with are what we're striving for. We want to talk about the quiet parts in media literacy as it develops. We don't want to take ourselves too seriously. We know that a lot of this stuff is ridiculous and is unnecessary, and that's kind of part of the fun is really getting into it. We want to have faith in the process. Much like the Sherlock show that I've just finished, Give Up After 3, this process will shape itself. What the show looks like by the time we're done is not what the show looks like now. And that's a really exciting prospect.
Yeah, for sure.
So, okay. I want to, before we get into Daredevil, I want to just know really quickly, so you guys did you and Mitchie watched through all of Breaking Bad and did your Breaking Bad Method to the Madness show. Were there any takeaways that you had from that experience that you think could be supplanted onto this experience? Like, do you have any advice for us? Any takeaways? What was your general experience working back through that show as a project?
Something that really surprised me was like how consistent we were in length for each episode. Like we somehow always managed to keep it around 20 minutes.
A lot of them were almost exactly 26 minutes, like almost exactly.
Right, which I maybe speak to like the consistency of the show. Like there's just like the same amount of like content and substance in each episode, except for for like the finale. Obviously, we went pretty overboard on that. But I think you are right on the money. Like it sort of forms itself as you go on, and there's a lot of discovery and there's a lot of like revelations that happen. I mean, just that's not particular to that series. It's in any podcast, but when you're discussing art, but this will be good.
Interesting. Okay, Daredevil. All right, so Daredevil just for those who haven't interfaced with this piece of art at all, don't know the character. Daredevil historically in the comic books is one of those funny characters that, much like a lot of the things that Marvel kind of has tackled, with the obvious exception of Spider-Man and that's involvement with the Sony vehicle, is Daredevil's like not a big deal in the comics for a lot of readers. Contrasted with your kind of mainstream heroes like your Spider-Mans, like your Avengers, right? Daredevil is one of these characters that comes in and out of vogue as the eras go on, is really popular in the 90s alongside Punisher, and when those two comics interface, they become quite successful. Daredevil is kind of conceptualized as a joke response to Batman, because, Marvel went, that's funny. They have a guy who dresses like a bat, but doesn't have echolocation. What if we had a guy who couldn't see that had echolocation?
I've never considered that parallel before. That's hilarious.
Yeah. And so it's no surprise to me that this is the best Batman TV show that exists. Like, if we're being honest with ourselves.
You're right. I want to clarify. I mean, obviously the parallels between Batman and Daredevil are obvious, yes. Like Vigilante who has no superpowers, just, punches people really good.
You had to put the joke together.
Yeah, the echolocation thing.
It's very funny.
That is funny. Is that... But he was conceived as a joke? Like, that seems kind of...
It's very Stanley
mean.
Ditko to do stuff like that. That was a lot of their maneuvers. Yeah, I mean, like, Captain Marvel was obviously a riff on Shazam. Like, that was kind of the era back then, was very much like tit for tat. You guys have a Hulk or we have a fucking Superman. There was a lot of that kind of thing happening. And you see that in the crossover comics where they line these characters up with their counterparts. They don't include Daredevil, but Batman and Wolverine have a showdown because they're both like the gruff outsider who refuses to have a family kind of thing. One thing I should say before we get into this show, you notice, is that my investment in comic books is pretty fleeting. I had a few of them growing up, but I was a book guy. I wasn't a comic book guy. But as I got older and like particularly, high school, university, I read a lot of comic books because they were pretty available on Apple, subscription applications on like iPads and things like that. So I did a lot of reading of comics at that time. That's where a lot of this is influenced from. Talk me through... Okay, so Daredevil is something that we have talked about a lot in the past. And I think like most people that do this kind of work, we talked about it, but we didn't really talk about it because I think there's that intuitive sense of like, oh, this is like a shared interest. We will eventually make content about this. So we've talked about it. We haven't really talked about it. When did you first watch it? Like, what were the material conditions? How did you come to it?
The first time I watched it, it was a great show, but like, my setting wasn't great. I watched it in like a sleep-deprived haze. I binge watched like all of season 1, and then Jessica Jones season 1, and then Daredevil season 2. And then didn't really take it in. And then I just on a whim just rewatched it a couple years later, and I was like, "Yo, what the? You're like, this the hell is this? This is the best TV some show. Shit! Like, yeah, this is fucking really good."
It's funny you say that. I had the same experience. The first time I watched it, I was so sick. I lost like 3 days of my life. Like it just is gone from my memory. I literally spent 3 days of my life like hunched over a toilet bowl. And as I was coming out of that illness, I watched the first season of Daredevil just horizontal on the couch. Horizontal on my mom's couch, being like, I can't eat or sleep, and all I do when I eat is be sick, and I need something to distract myself. And I was like immediately pulled in. Like that was when season 1 had just come out, I think.
I think I don't blame people who watch Daredevil for the first time and don't really get much out of it, because I feel like it kind of has that effect where it has this kind of like muted aesthetic, both like tonally as well as visually, and it sort of blurs together, and like the plot is like it's surprisingly like complicated, and you can miss like a lot of shit, and therefore it sort of seems like it's kind of like a nothing show, and a lot of the conversations aren't very meaningful. I think the other side to that is like, I've rewatched the show 5 times now. Every time I get more stuff out of it. It's just, it's that kind of show, which I think gets better on a rewatch.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I put it in the kind of the same ballpark as things like Mad Men, where it's very, it's keenly interested in presenting an exact moment and scene, and then having the gusto to kind of let you live in it. Like it has these moments where every other show would cut to the next scene, and we get another 5 or 6 seconds of a character living in a reaction to a moment. And I think it I struggle to say this with a straight face without thinking of Lost. I guess I've been thinking about Lost a lot as I'm writing the Sherlock book, but like it feels like it sort of looked at the lineage of what we would call prestige TV. So your Sopranos, your Lost, things like that became water cooler conversation. And it feels like it looked at that and it went, what if the thing that you thought about at the end of each episode wasn't what great twist is going to happen? You know, let me unpack the narrative twist. It was like, what if the thing you walked away from each episode was a real consideration of like the morality of the things that occurred and the fate of these the fate of these characters' moral souls, right? And in that way, it's very similar to Mad Men, I think. And
it's very similar to like Better Call Saul as well.
Oh, deeply so.
Where like the actual the most salient thing about the show, what keeps you going forward, is like, you know, the fate of the characters, like their moral, you know, like their moral like constitution, then like what, I don't know how they're gonna end up, and like just the battle for their soul kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I guess like, you know, that takes with the legacy of things like Silence of the Lambs, which is really sort of deeply steeped in the thriller genre, and really is like the genre setter for the thriller. This is far more, and this is kind of what I wanted to get to, is like, what is Daredevil? And I think it varies season to season. You quite aptly put it the other day that season 1 is a religious epic in a lot of ways. It is about, you know, it is David and Goliath, right? It's Daredevil v. Wilson Fisk. But the way that Fisk isn't just a bad guy. That's the other thing that I think is really interesting to think about, is like, Fisk isn't just a bad guy. He represents not just mortal jeopardy for Matt Murdock. You know, Wilson Fisk could and does beat the crap out of him, but he represents you know, moral jeopardy and damnation, right? It's like, and you know, that ends up being what season 3 is about, is like, what is Matt Murdock willing to do to stop this dude that he knows is like, that he knows won't stop, right? Like, Wilson Fisk is in his mind unstoppable, and the only closure on that is death, right? Like, the only way to stop this dude, every time he gets knocked down, he seems to have another scheme or whatever.
He's just so like overwhelmingly powerful and influential, and it's you know, his struggle, you know, throughout his fight with Fisk. I think he says this in like the first couple episodes. He's like, what do you do against someone who has that much power and that much money and that much influence? Yeah,
it's like trying to fist fight a force of nature. And you know, Matt Murdock not only is outmatched strength wise, right? Like, Wilson Fisk can tidily defeat him in you know, the martial, like, hand-to-hand combat, but also resource wise, Wilson Fisk is fucking well off and rich, and Matt Murdock is broke as shit at all times. Which is kind of why, like, it shares a lot of similarities with the kind of themes that run through a lot of the better Spider-Man stories in a lot of interesting ways, where it's like, he is always outsmarted and outclassed by the bad guys, and he has to kind of clever his way out of things a lot of the time. Or in a lot of the Spider-Man comics, in fact, compassion his way out of it. And that's, you know, Peter Parker's super strength is not his super strength or his spider abilities, it's his compassion. And Matt Murdock's kind of super strength, which is something that I think we'll be talking about a lot in this show, is like, yes, he's good at fighting. Yes, he's blind, but he can obviously see and predict things. But I think there's a question of, like, what is it that allows him to get through this stuff? And where is the delineation between that being a benefit and a boon, and that being like a really critically, morally jeopardizing thing, right? You know, in some of the first episodes, I've already rewatched the first episode in anticipation because I wanted to whet my palate. Is like, one of the first things we get about him is like, the Murdock boys have a devil inside of them, and it's like that. What does that mean for this character, where he's sort of leveling this force of violence for good? Like, what does that mean for him, for his soul, just like generally writ large, and then like also given he's a man of faith, like what does that mean for him and his interiority?
The way the show like consistently like draws parallels between you know, this battle between of his like sort of his soul, as well as the external battle between him and Fisk, and like, you know, comparing that to like religious stories, because, you know, like they're all morals, right? Like there's a lot of wisdom in these sort of stories once you get down to it, once you like break it down. So this show has like this really mature take on Catholicism, and it just like the way it works that into the narrative of like Matt Murdock's psychology is something I haven't seen anywhere else, and it's really, really compelling shit.
It's one of two stories I've interfaced with that treat religion with this amount of delicate exploration. The other one is like Pentiment, which is the new game by the guys that made Fallout New Vegas, led by the old Obsidian guys. If you haven't played Pentiment, you're interested in these topics, you definitely should. It's a game that is basically a book. It's a lot of reading, but it's excellent. But yeah, you're right. This story, talking and writing about religion is really difficult because mostly people writing about it in this way aren't religious anymore. I can't imagine this show being written by someone who is a devout Catholic, right? That just seems unlikely.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest challenges about that is like, if you have the level of understanding to write something with this amount of nuance about religion, the chances are that you used to be religious and are no longer. And that's quite an embittening experience for a lot of people. You know, two of my best friends, you know, they met in church and they got married, and now they both are you know, staunch atheists as a result of working through a lot of that, and it's really difficult for someone who's been through those things. I'm talking anecdotally here. I have no evidence to support this, but it seems to be my understanding that like it's then really difficult to talk about it as like an academic exercise because that can be quite, there's a lot of trauma associated there. But the way that this is written, like I can't imagine this being constructed by anybody who wasn't at least part of that or in proximity to that stuff. It just has such a nuance of understanding that I think is really, really rare. And as you say, interweaves that with its themes and faith. We wanted to talk, so before we get into spoilers, which we will do, and I'll flag that as we're coming, and our kind of plan here. But I guess one of like the central things the story is about is faith. And that can be both in, God in some instances. It can be faith in the legal system. It can be faith in the vigilante justice. It can be faith in Wilson Fisk. It can be faith in the systems that we uphold and support. It can be faith in the ideals like revenge, like we see in season 2. So I guess I'm interested, before we kind of get into the weeds and talk a little bit about spoilers and sort of the shape of the thing. What do you kind of think the show is about, or like what's like your high level, like, hey, this is the thing the show is doing?
I think, it's about a lot of things. If I had to put it into a word, I think it's mostly an exploration of morality. In the first season, it's a question of like, is it worth it to become a villain to fight evil? In the second season, it's like, does everyone deserve a second chance regardless of the harm they've caused in the past? In the third season, it's kind of the same as the first season, but it's also like, what is the cost of discarding your identity in exchange for your conviction and, to do what you need to do? Mm-hmm. Morality is, I think, the big neon sign.
That was
show
that was well
portrays.
that was really well said.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna read a little bit from the mission doc of just like what we're trying to do as a show, because what we're gonna do next is I'm gonna put a really big marker in here of, we will take a break in a minute and then we will do spoilers. So we'll probably talk for a few more minutes. I want to just lay out, like, I guess the some of the groundwork of what we want to do here. And then I want to talk about our ambitions with this project. Then we're going to say, hey, from here on out, if you haven't seen the show before and you want to watch along with us, or you just don't want to be spoiled and you want to listen along, don't listen to the rest of this episode and wait for the next episode to come out, which will be out at the start of season 1. If you have seen the show and you're thinking to yourself, man, I fucking love Daredevil, I'm keen to hear these guys talk about it, feel free to stick around. I will flag that multiple times. You won't miss it. It'll be and if you want to skip to the end, there'll be timestamps in the thingy. Okay, so I just want to read like what I wrote the other night when I was thinking about what this show was trying to be. So I'm gonna read this out, and then we can talk a little bit about like what we're hoping to get from it. And also, actually, before I do that, do you want to give like the elevator pitch for Method to the Madness as a project?
A Method to the Madness is a podcast where we talk about movies and TV shows. I mean, you gave a pretty good summary before. It's not really about like comparing it to like what's popular and what's happening in the media space. It's more about like what can you take away from this show? Like what sort of what lessons does it give? What does it moralize? Does it philosophize? What are the big picture ideas in these movies and shows? We try to look at stuff in like a philosophical framework. We're not philosophers by any means. We just find that stuff interesting, and we try our best to sort of sound smart.
That was well said. The reason I bring that up is so me and Pat worked together on Arthritis for a few years, and we're obviously interested in the same kind of stuff. I come from a far more like literary background. I think you come much more from the film side of things in general. I think most people listening to this will know what ZeroIndent is, but I'll give you the elevator pitch anyway. We're a media crit publication, so media criticism for those uninitiated. We're about the verb, not the noun, which I always feel the need to explain because a lot of people be like, what does that mean?
You do need to explain. Yeah. That is so, yeah.
I know, it's a weird sentence. So a lot of media criticism describes things and is very noun heavy and is like, thing is X, thing is Y. We're about the verb, which is about the doing and the process. So we're about why certain things work, what's going on under the hood, what makes certain things more affecting than others. My elevator pitch is like, and I'm reading from a note I've written down. I think I wrote this like 4 years ago, but the goal is to hit reset on the critical lens, to say we deserve more than 4 out of 5 stars, and to think about what we consume again. We want to process information and art, not just endlessly take it in. One of my biggest concerns about modernity and the way that our viewing habits have changed is that we are looking to consume as an act instead of consuming as a process. So instead of watching something and being like, man, damn, that was a really good show, I really enjoyed it, we consume because that's what we do. Like, that's just like you need something to fill your time, and then you go on to the next thing. And one of my biggest concerns, and the reason that I started ZeroIndent and moved away from the old project we've been doing at DCM Works, is like, I want to spend more time on things. It would have been more profitable, both, subscribers, viewers, probably Patreon money, to stick with the DCM Works model of like cover a thing every week. But we got to a point where like there just wasn't the time to put the research and the thinking behind the ideas we were talking about. And so it even, when the show ended, it was at its best, to be certain, but it wasn't sustainable for me to do like 12 hours of research a week plus consuming the content plus doing a full-time job. And so instead, in focusing on larger projects that are limited, so like, Give Up to 3, where we rewatched every episode of Sherlock, we knew it had an end, and I knew that I could do enough pre-work to make it sustainable. This is kind of similar. I'm not doing this, I'm not going to write an academic book after this like I did with Sherlock. So you're not going to have me bringing the same level of like literary theory and research. I will still be doing some of that, but it's not going to be like, it'll be slightly... Also, this show is good, so I don't need a lot of those tools. I can just be like, this was really enjoyable, and here is how it affected me. I don't have to try and break down the things that were going on. And I want to re-quote myself at the start of this, because I try and say this wherever I can. One of my biggest mantras, and I, to this day, after like years of saying it, I don't know if it's a me thought or if I've quoted it from someone. No one's been able to be like, it's from this person. Google doesn't help me. But my whole take is that we consume nonfiction to understand the world and what's going on, and we consume fiction to understand ourselves. And for me, that's why I've always gravitated toward fiction. And that's probably like that sentence, whether I said it or not, I genuinely don't know. If someone knows who said it, please let me know.
Well, there's this really good George Martin quote, which he got from another author, where he says, the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself.
There you go.
Yeah,
exactly right. So that's kind of my investment here. I'm an author myself. I do the Maynard Trigg series. I've obviously got that academic book coming out. I also have a book of personal essays coming out soon as well. So like I'm always in this space thinking about stuff. And I haven't done a show about stuff I like ever.
You poor man.
I know. Isn't it weird to think about?
I see the effects that it has on you. Every time I see you,
I'm broken.
Just get beaten down. I'm like, bro, you gotta... That's why I suggested this, for your benefit.
For my mental health.
I gotta help out my boy David. Like,
yeah. If I have to watch Sherlock again, I'm gonna cry. Okay. Let me read the snippet, then we'll flag the spoiler. Well, I'll read this, get your thoughts on it, then we'll flag it, and then we'll do spoilers. Daredevil is a story about morality, justice, and the concept of the self. In immersing ourselves in the attitude and philosophy of Hell's Kitchen, we hope to draw in sharp focus what makes the story so exacting and compelling. Not just to praise the craft of storytelling, but to unpack our own feelings and thoughts about the ideas it raises. Faith in a modern world, what do we do with the legacy of our inheritance, and of course, who we are? What does a name mean, claimed and given, and how do they shape us? This is a careful story, and so we shall tread lightly where possible. This may mean taking breaks to give ourselves time to process. This may mean taking breaks to deal with life. In the spirit of the show's ideas, we aim to be considerate and present in our production and discussion. We will speak freely on and off microphone. As we do the work, it makes us and shapes us. And as we complete the work, it completes us. And so we will not be afraid to unpack challenging concepts. Ultimately, we will enjoy the process to the best of our ability and allow the show to adapt when this may not be possible. Basically, I'm really excited to talk about something that's good, is what that means.
Hell yeah.
Because, boy, doing a show for 9 months about something that you fucking hate, not good for your brain. Really good book that you're getting out of it. You're going to write a really good book, but your brain's going to suffer because every 2 weeks you have to watch a fucking episode of Sherlock. Okay? So I'm very keen. Yeah, look, anything you want to add before we do some big spoilers of like the shape of the show and then, you know, we'll wrap up at the end talking about, you know, our structural plan, I guess.
I want to sort of add on to what I was talking about earlier about the, you know, morality is like the biggest thing in the show, which I think it is. But, you know, something I've been sort of like grappling with this last couple years is like, what do I look for in like the art / the media / stories I consume? I've sort of like narrowed it down to like just nuance. You know, and that kind of seems like a nothing answer. Like, yeah, obviously we like nuance. Like, that is what sort of makes something interesting, right? That's what something gives something like layers. And but you know, in saying that, like, I feel like a lot of mainstream media, that's quite rarely observed. And you know, to take a page from my favorite narrative scholar, Robert McKee, you know, nuance is contradiction, right? Morally, philosophically, or ideologically, or otherwise. Basically, it means that there's no easy answers. And I feel like Daredevil captures that sentiment a lot about how there's no easy answers. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. No easy answers. Yeah. I mean, the show embodies this, right? The other way that I would...
Although...
Yeah.
Yeah. Although... you ever hear that thing about how Alan Moore like really doesn't like the superhero genre post Watchmen, and especially like stories that followed his example of going really dark, because he wanted to set an example of like, no, these stories are bad. Like, if these people were real, they'd be really fucked up human beings. And then everyone was like, yeah, these dark superheroes, like, they're so cool. I feel like Daredevil has the same thing where it's like it seems like a lot of the time the moral is like, oh, you know, Matt's like punching people to solve his problems. Look what it's doing to him. Like, it's not good. But at the end of the day, he does solve all his problems by punching people. That's so true. Like, he does do that. You can only go so far with these kind of themes in a superhero show. Yeah. However, you know, it's still good.
Maybe we should talk about spoilers, because I want to talk about what that manifests into in season 3, because I think that's where so for the uninitiated, season 1 is a certified banger that everyone agrees. People are pretty hot and cold on season 2. People mostly like it, but people, you know, critically, it's like, people can take it or leave it. Season 3, certified banger. Probably a few too many episodes, but certified banger.
Yeah.
Is the critical consensus. Something I quite like about Daredevil as a project. Also, I should say, so I'll get into the structural stuff. Actually, maybe let's do this. Maybe I'll say what the show is. I'll say what the structure is. And then we can say goodbye to our non-spoiler people, and then we can get into spoilers. I realize that doesn't make any sense. We should do it in one chunk. Okay, so each season of this show, so of Daredevil in the Details, we will watch a season of the show. So we're going to watch season 1 in chunks. There's about 6-ish chunks. Then we're going to do a coverage of... we're going to do a crossover episode with The Method to the Madness, where we cover Daredevil, the 2003 film. Then we're going to watch Daredevil season 2. Those chunks are still emerging, as Patrick watches it and chunks it together for us. Then we're going to watch The Defenders. That's going to probably be like only 2 episodes, because it's pretty short. We're not thrilled about that, but we're going to do it because it's continuity relevant. Then we're going to watch Daredevil season 3. We're going to then try and do another crossover with A Method to the Madness by covering Elektra from 2005, which I think we're going to have a lot of thoughts about that. I've never seen it, but I've only heard bad things.
Yeah, I've never seen it either.
Yeah. Then we're gonna watch She-Hulk. Probably do 1 or 2 episodes about that because he's in that. And then by that time, that should take us to Daredevil: Born Again around this time next year. So this it's gonna be a journey. We're gonna take our time. We're not gonna rush it. We're gonna take breaks if we need. But we're gonna do it all because I'm just mostly excited to rewatch this freaking show again because it's so good. I wasn't that excited until I sat down the other night and I watched the first episode, and I one of my notes that I wrote down was, this is really fucking good. Like, it's a really good TV show.
Dude, they pack so much like pathos into the first episode. Like, I think that line is in the first episode where Matt goes, yeah, like I learned, I learned how to cope with being blind, but I'd still give anything to see the sky one more time.
Oh my god, yeah, he says that to Karen, yeah.
Yeah, and like that's something that isn't really relevant at all, like for the rest of the show. Like that sort of idea of him wanting his sight back never
comes up,
pops back up again. But it's just it just really caught my interest this time around. I was like, man, it's a really interesting bit of pathos that they just put in the first episode.
Have you watched, and you probably haven't because it's not that available anymore, the Shandification of Fallout video?
No.
Okay. So Rybald brought it up on our solo podcast, but I'll relitigate a point he makes, which is, so Shandification is basically this process of like, to make a film or a TV show, in contemporary sense at least, A happens, then B happens, then C happens, then D happens. And you have little bits of peripheral information that you include in order to buttress that story, right? I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but that's the general argument. Shandification is where a story is told in such a way that bits of information that aren't relevant to the A and then B and then C and then D are included to do other things. So a really shandified story is something like the original Fallout game, where you can kind of like futz around and just like learn about the world if you want. And in stories that aren't video games, it's really hard to do because obviously like when you're watching a film, you can't be like, yeah, I'd like you to go and do a side quest to learn about this, farm of robots or whatever. But in stories, when it happens, it has to be very deliberate. And so one of the things that I learned as I was working on my first 2 novels, and less so with the third one that's coming out soon, but like definitely the first 2, is like, it's really important to choose those bits of extra information you include, because they have to not be relevant to this. Like, they don't have to directly not be relevant, right? It could be 2 characters talking about something unrelated to the narrative. But those 2 characters are important, and how they talk is important, and their relationship is important. But like what they talk about doesn't impact that story. So like, for example, in book 1, Maynard and Abby, they have this, they're sitting on the deck toward the end of the story. It's just before the big final act. And, Abby just like talks about her home and where she came from, and describes this place. And Maynard's like, man, that's like really interesting. And they talk about it a bit. There's a different version of reality where actually this almost happened, where my editor was like, hey, you should cut that out. That's not relevant. Like, this is really indulgent. It's not working. And I fought for it because for me, it felt like this, obviously the calm before the storm, but also it felt like it pulled the lens back a little bit, and it went, here's some extra stuff that is going to make you think about these characters in this world and make it feel a bit more realized. And that ultimately is a lot of the feedback I got, which is like, man, I want to see more of this world. It sounds interesting, which to me suggests that as a mechanism worked, right? And I think one of the things that's really curious about Daredevil as a project is it's treading a fine line between being in the Marvel universe, right? The MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and then also being its own thing entirely. In that first few episodes, we get the talk of the incident and things like that, which is the events of the first Avengers film. But it manages to carve out its own really unique voice and tone. It's kind of like Hell's Kitchen, which we'll talk about. It's like 3 city blocks, inexplicably. But it has its own world building within that. And these characters get to have their own history and past that are really kind of, they have texture, is what I would say. They have a lot of everything in this show has tremendous texture, and when it doesn't have that, you feel it pretty obviously because the rest of it is so well realized. And I think that's part of some people's friction with season 2 is like there is some stuff in there where you go, I kind of felt like you told me that because it was plot relevant, and it just didn't have enough something, you know.
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah, texture. I like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude. Hell's Kitchen is hip happening. I'll tell you what. There's all sorts of stuff going on in the 3 blocks.
Yeah,
Hell's Kitchen.
Exactly. Okay, so
also,
yeah.
To your thing about like, you know, that scene of Maynard and Abby in your book. It's also that does a lot for like rhythm as well, right? Like I increasingly am comparing like storytelling to like music theory in like the last like few years, and like I think rhythm is like such an underrated but like very profoundly important element of storytelling that
it's the bridge before the final verse, right? Like it's that moment of pop music where like it changes just enough that it propels you toward that final verse. Like it is that moment. Okay, well, look, here's what we're going to do. Unless you have anything non-spoilery to say, any other thoughts before we get into the, I guess, the shape of the show, and I guess we'll talk in broad strokes about each season and what they're trying to do. Anything else you want to add before we migrate?
Just one more selling point for the show. If you haven't seen it and you're like, you know, you're trying to decide if you are going to see it, you know, this is all what we've been talking about is all pretty like, you know, heady broad strokes, not very, it doesn't give you any details. Like this isn't helpful at all if you're deciding if you want to watch the show. But I think, you know, when you're watching it, you'll find that like the moment to moment like beats and decisions by the characters and the dialogue are so charged with these broader themes that I think, and this is what like all like my favorite shows do, like you know, Breaking Bad and other examples. I'm sure there are other examples.
I'm sure there are other shows out there.
Yeah. That's, it's always interesting. Like to me, like every moment in this show, there's always some sort of, there's always something going on, and it's, you know, it seems contradictory to say, but the subtext is palpable in every part of the show.
You can feel what's not being said, even if you don't know what that is. Which, but someone the other day was like, "What does subtext mean?" And I was like, "That's what it is. It's like you can feel that there are things being left unsaid."
Right.
Even as soon as that first episode, right? Like when I rewatched it the other night, I was like, oh, like there is just like dozens of things that these characters aren't saying to each other during every conversation that they could, and they're just not. And that's really like, it makes as you say, it makes everything charged. I think that's the right word.
That's the best kind of stuff where when you rewatch it with the holistic understanding of the relationship between these characters and like where they will eventually go and where they have been, the pieces like fall into place like as you're watching it. Like every like sentence, every piece of dialogue like just makes sense, gives you like a lot of like information, you know, like sort of like changes like, you know, valences, as you like to say, of like their relationships, and like there's always stuff happening in this show, like, and so my point is basically it's not just like these like big picture morality questions. It's actually like the moment to moment stuff is like also just really, really compelling.
I agree. Also, the action absolutely tears. There's the fight scenes in the show are excellent.
They are. However, I think it's one of the things that is very imperfect about this show. Like a lot of the fight scenes are especially in season 3, you'll just see like background extras, like the punch will just like be a mile off, and they'll just be, ugh.
Yeah.
And you're like, look, I get it. Like you don't have an infinite budget. Like you're shooting like 13 1-hour episodes. Look, it's all right. I'll give you a pass, but I noticed it. I still noticed it.
It's scrappy at times. Yeah. And that's also part of its charm. is that you can sometimes you can sometimes feel the restriction. I think that's really interesting. This sounds so dumb. I like the fact that it's not that polished. I think it makes it feel a bit more organic sometimes. Which someone watching this is going to find a clip of me being like, I hate it when a show's messy. I like it. Like, there's going to be video of me saying this shit. Don't clip it.
Look, when you do podcasting for as long as you've probably contradicted every single point you've ever said. So
correct. Yeah. Look, this show's awesome. If you haven't watched it, we do encourage you to watch along with us. You don't have to. We will give summaries of each episode. And like, the way that we'll talk about it inevitably is probably chronologically anyway. So you're probably going to like have the experience of watching it even if you haven't. But I would encourage you, if you're interested, give the first few episodes a dip in. So Pat, because this is where we'll leave the non-spoiler viewers. So what we're going to do for next episode, which will be episode 1, this is episode 0, is we are going to watch episode 1 through 3.
Yep.
So that's Into the Ring, Cutman, and Rabbit in a Snowstorm. They form kind of the first act of the first season, if you will. It's our introduction to these characters and their world. These are all written by Bill Everett and Drew Goddard, which we'll get into as the show kind of goes on. They write almost all of this show, which is really interesting.
And Drew Goddard has an interesting career.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of that when we get to season 2. Okay, so if you don't want spoilers, feel free to turn off your podcast catcher of choice, or if you're on YouTube, feel free to click away, watch something by probably. And we will, I don't know, he seems popular at the moment. I don't know.
That's such an arbitrary
choice. I don't know. It was the first, I said the word YouTuber and I was like, what's a YouTube clip that gets recommended to me a lot that I don't watch?
Okay, he's a Twitch streamer, but okay.
Okay, I'll bleep the name of the other. You don't need to know who I said. That's going to make it even more interesting. Feel free to jump off. Before you do go, feel free to give us a rating or review on your podcast catcher of choice, whatever the engagement tool is they provide. It helps more people find the show. We will do pluggables. We haven't worked this out yet. There will be pluggables at some point for like some kind of funding process. It's still in flight. We don't know. We'll work it out. Pat, before we do that, where can people find you on the internet? Where can they follow what you do if they're about to dip out?
I do a podcast with my friend Mitchie called A Method to the Madness. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. Just search up A Method to the Madness.
There'll be links in the description as well.
Yeah.
It's a very good podcast, and you should listen to it. Y'all also did a full rewatch of Breaking Bad, which I am slowly working my way through as I rewatch the show. Very good podcast. Right. The contrast of the way that you and Mitchie watch the show is like some of the most interesting conversations that you all have ever had. It's legitimately like it's one of my like top 3 podcasts at the moment. Like I'm loving it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We will probably cover Better Call Saul sometime in the future. We want to sort of sit on it like. After the ending, we just just need to process it a bit, maybe in like a year or something. But
by the time this comes out, we'll probably have done something on A Method to the Madness. Mitchie's on holiday or he's traveling, so we're gonna probably pick up the slack when we get our shit together and do something over there. So you can probably hear us talking about films and stuff for a while. Then Mitchie will be back, but definitely go check it out. I fucking love A Method to the Madness. We did a series on the Daniel Craig James Bond films that's really interesting.
That's right.
You can hear me and Mitchie get way too intellectual, and Pat take the Mitchie role and be like, guys, it's a handsome dude doing stunts. What are you talking about? It's a real...
I wasn't as invested as you guys, but I liked it.
It's a really, really fun series. Go check it out, Method to the Madness. I go buy my books. We should have the URL by the time this comes out. Let me just check. Hang on.
Is your 3rd book out?
Well, my 3rd book will be out in April, which will be slightly after this comes out, only just. But you can go and find all of my stuff now at our new publication, underink.press. That's underink.press. We are starting an indie publication where we basically shelled out a bunch of cash and we bought the rights back to my books, and we're publishing them all. And we're starting an independent publishing brand. We will be taking submissions in the latter half of this year, so 2023. If you have a book you've written you think we'd be interested in, definitely send it over. That's underink.press, where you can find the Maynard Trigg series, which is presumably behind me in my shot. I don't know if that made it into... Yeah, it just makes it into the camera. As well as my new book, Give Up After 3, which is an academic book, but it's also kind of not. Like, it's sort of a close reading, kind of an academic book about BBC Sherlock, and it's a historical analysis of the lost final episode. So if you've ever wondered to yourself, what is Tumblr capable of, you should definitely go and purchase that book and read it. I kept it light, I kept it breezy, and it's a really fun read, I hope. So you can go check those out. Underink.press. There'll be links, as always, in the show notes.
What's on your mind, Matthew? Wasn't that hard to find out. People still remember battling Jack Murdoch around these parts. And what happened to his son. Seal of confession still applies, even over lattes. Not what you're worried about.
Do you believe in the devil, Father?
You mean... as a concept?
No. Do you believe he exists? In this world, among us?
Okay, so if you want non-spoilers, leave now. This is your last opportunity to not get spoiled on Daredevil. If you've seen it before, stick around. We're going to talk about the shape of each season. I'm probably going to get Pat to kind of lay out the general story of each season, and then we're going to kind of talk a little bit about, like, I guess, what we think the show's about. And I'm really interested to see, as we work through this project, what we end up thinking the show's about after it. So if you don't want to be spoiled, this is your last opportunity to do that. I'm talking slowly, so you can turn off your podcast feed or the YouTube video. Okay? Okay.
Wait, sorry, I just got to turn my...
Yeah. Here's an even longer moment for you to do that.
Yeah.
If you haven't,
if you
haven't turned off, it's
that's
your
on
fault.
you.
It's on you now.
Yeah.
We gave you a fucking minute, bro. Okay? You had a minute.
But if you did stick around, we appreciate you.
Yeah, hey, listen. Hey, fam. You're in the circle. Hey, hey, Frank. I don't think anyone's called Frank anymore. Hey, Carol. No, too old. Hey, what are young people called? I don't know.
Dennis.
Aaron. Okay, I want to talk about process. So you've been rewatching the show ahead of time, in no small part because that's your preferred method, but also I can't group the episodes without having watched them, and I want to kind of like watch them directly before we do the show.
Yeah.
Talk me through your method. Like what's your approach here of both consuming it and then, you know, don't you fucking dare. Don't you fucking dare. That's like when someone says, oh yeah, it's art. And I'm like, for whom?
Yeah, I don't know how I would have like gracefully led that into the title, but I'm
sure
let's just assume that it would have worked really well.
Let's assume it was very funny and clever, as Pat always is.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, what was the question?
So what's your method for the show? So like rewatching these episodes, what's your approach here? Like you said you were going to you sort of rewatching all of them and then you'll, consume them. Like what's your approach here? So for context, the way I approach Sherlock is the same way I'm going to do this, where, well, slightly different asterisk. With Sherlock, I rewatched the episode, then I did all of my research and then rewatched it again, because that was like an academic show. I had to do that. You said to me the other day that like you've already started rewatching it, which is great because it means you can group the episodes as you go. But like, yeah, what's your approach in consuming the show for this project?
Since we sort of decided that, unlike the Sherlock where you sort of dive into like every single detail of every episode, so we're gonna sort of take a more broader approach when looking at the ideas of the show. And so I thought it would be good to complete the show first, get like a holistic view of what the show is, what it's exploring, how it makes me feel. And then when we do the episodes, when we do each episode of our show, I'm just going to go back and individually watch the episodes and then, write notes on them. That's what I did for Breaking Bad. I was originally just watching them like episode to episode as me and Mitchie were doing it. But at some point, like somewhere in season 3, I just got too invested and I needed to just continue. So I just went forward. And then I did the same thing. I went back as we did our episodes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Same idea here.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I guess what I'm interested in is where are you up to currently? And where are you up to? And then we'll talk about like the broad strokes of like each season, I guess.
I am up to, I think, season 2, episode 10. So they already had the People vs. Frank Castle case.
Yep.
And then Elektra. So we're saying spoilers.
Oh, if you're still here and you don't want spoilers,
sorry.
Why are you here?
I completely.
No,
Yeah,
that's a good point. No. Pat makes a good point. If you're still here and you don't want to be spoiled, it's your fault. Patrick, go ahead and say what you're going to say.
So, Matt sort of puts his trust into Elektra, and he wants to fix her, and then Elektra just like slits that guy's throat like right in front of Matt.
God, yeah.
Yeah, and then Matt's like, "What the fuck?" Like, and then Elektra goes, "This is who I am," and so and also like Karen, yeah, and his entire life has fallen apart. Foggy and him had a fallout because Matt's sort of just fully chosen to be Daredevil and not like commit to his lawyer life. Karen found Elektra in Matt's bed and she thinks
that's
he's
right.
got like a secret harem.
And they are kind of trying to work out what they are. They're clearly in romantic entanglement. Right.
It was a very it wasn't a solid relationship as of yet. Mm-hmm. It was still developing, and then that just got like destroyed. Mm-hmm. So Matt's like really like at the bottom of his pit right now. Great drama. Because I just watched that episode. So something that I wrote down was like the character motivations in this show are like really, really thought out. Like there's in the next couple episodes you'll see like the first example is like Claire pulling Matt out of the dumpster where she finds him, and then the whole episode you're like, why did she do that? And then at the end it's revealed like she's there's been a lot of like criminals coming into hospitals, being like beaten to a pulp, and all these stories surrounding it about how they were about to like assault someone, and then some man in black came and saved him, and so that's why she saved him. Mm-hmm. And then in the case of Elektra like slitting that guy's throat, it just happens out of nowhere. After you have this like really like beautiful scene of Matt going like, no, I'm gonna fix you. We're gonna work through this together. We're gonna do this my way. And then at the start of the next episode, Elektra says, Matt goes, why did you do that? And Elektra says, I killed him in self-defense. Even your precious court of law would say that's legitimate. And it's this really small window into her psychology, but it sort of like explains a lot. Like, and I felt like that is one of many examples of like how the show, of the subtlety in the show in explaining motivations and giving little windows into like character psychology and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's something. We talked about it a little bit in non-spoilers, but I mean, I want to make a few things explicit about my stakes in this show. There's a thing. So I mentioned Mad Men because that's always my touch point for like these kinds of shows. If you didn't know, I think like I'm not speaking to you. I know you know this, Pat, but like to the listener, Mad Men is like, I think it's one of the best TV shows that exists. It really is up there with the contemporary champions that are out there. you know, it gives prestige TV a run for its money as a concept, and that's really hard to do. The only thing recently that has kind of been, you know, my top three, kind of, well, let's say top five. I think I can do that off the cuff. Not in any particular order, just in the order that I remember them as I'm saying them out loud. Like, my favorite shows are what I think are the best shows. And when I say best shows, I mean, as we've said, you know, shows that are about a lot of things. They have a lot of subtext. They're trying to say something. My best shows would be, again, in no particular order, Mad Men, BoJack Horseman, Community, Daredevil. Oh, what would the fifth be? Probably actually Better Call Saul, for sure. And I think what they all share in common, and this is, again, as I flagged at the start, this is our niche, right, is they have a lot that they're thinking about that they don't say, right? And, like, one of my curiosities with where Daredevil sits as a piece of media in the project that is the MCU is it becomes the connective tissue between Iron Fist and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's so compelling, it becomes the buttress that kind of threads them all together. The Defenders isn't great. Let's put that out there. It's not great. I'm not thrilled to talk about it, but I'm interested to revisit it. To your point about, like, the character, you know, that glimpse into the character motivation, what makes that work is they feel like slippage of those people. When I say people, I mean the characters, but what I'm saying is, like, from a human psychology perspective, they feel like slippages where, like, it's like when you're having a conversation with a colleague and they say something that's just really fucking real for a minute, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that about you. I didn't realize you had that opinion. I didn't realize your approach to the world was that. I always thought X, but actually you think Y. And
it's like when you joke about wanting to be stepped on by all these actresses, and I'm like, huh, that's interesting. You keep bringing that up, David.
Yeah, it's weird. That's interesting. I've never said that, and you can't prove I did.
Yeah, of course not.
And if James is listening, I'm also not into puppy play. James, if you're out there, I'm not. He's been substantiating that rumor for some years, and it's always been untrue, and was always a bit.
I think I'll have to question him about that myself.
Yeah, I regret to inform you that his response will be ill-informed and incorrect because it's never happened. But no, there's something about. I was thinking about that first episode I just watched, and I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to next episode. But even the scene that I thought was really interesting, and I don't know why, and I want to unpack that now because I think it pertains to the rest of the show. Like, if we're talking about, like, trying to understand what this show is, I think the pilot is a good place to start, as with any show. There's a scene where Karen goes to... Matt invites Karen to stay at his apartment for the evening because she's not safe in her own place. And they have a conversation in the living room, and Matt explains, like, hey, he's like, you should take the bed. And she's like, I wouldn't want to put you out. And he goes, oh, no. Like, from what I understand about my living room, that, you might be wrong about that. It turns out he's got this giant neon billboard or whatever. And they have this really bizarrely intimate moment where she's soaking wet, and he gives her a shirt to wear. And she strips in front of him and puts on the shirt. And there's something interesting happening at, like, a character drama level where her trust in him is, like, so complete with a very limited amount of interaction with him. And we know he can't see. We know we know from the action that's happened before that he can kick some dudes' asses, but he's fucking blind. And there is this interesting vulnerability that she shows that also isn't vulnerability because he is blind. And so we as the viewer are positioned in this place of, like, we get to see her being vulnerable, and he can't, I don't mean literally, but, like, he can't see that. And there's, I don't know what it is, but there's something happening there. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces of, like, in a different show, this scene would be like sexually charged, but it just isn't. Like, it just is a moment of intimacy, not sexual or otherwise. It's just intimacy of like, there's something about Matt that she finds safe, and then she leaves the flat and goes back to her old place to recover the the spreadsheets that prove the pension embezzlement and things like that, and has lied to him about that, which he already knows because he can hear heartbeats and know when people are lying. And so there's this moment of intimacy where she trusts him enough to strip in front of him and change, but not enough to tell him about the pension fund embezzlement. And there's so much in that moment that I think is emblematic of the entire show, where like a different show would have it be about one of those things, or like have one of those things happening. But this show is like, no simple answers. This is complicated. Because also, he's Daredevil. Like, that's the other thing that's happening in that scene, is he is the Man in Black, who is going to save her in the next scene. And so it's not just the character drama of will they, won't they? Does she find him attractive? Does she not? Does she trust him? Does she not? Does she feel safe? Does she not? It's also, well, she lied to him about the pension fund, and she's going to go and get that. And then it's also, will he find out and what will he do about it? And then it's also, will she be safe and will they be safe? And so like, it's this multi-purpose storytelling that is so layered and textured that it's carved into my brain as like it's a scene I've been thinking about for like 3 days since I saw it. Like, it's just in my fucking brain. Like, and I think that's emblematic of the show.
Yeah, there's some great acting chops going on in that scene as well. When she's taking her shirt off, like she thinks about it for a moment. It's like it's as if she remembers that, like, oh yeah, he's blind, and like, yeah. But then she's like, is this still kind of weird if I strip right in front of him, even though he is blind? And she like makes a decision, and like, a lot of these like nuances in the characters, it's just this like really like beautiful mix between the performances and the writing. They just like really, I'm lacking the articulation to describe it, but and I really like what you said about how in another show, in a lesser show, they would have made that scene like a really horny scene, like really sexually charged. That kind of maturity like carries through the entirety of Matt and Karen's relationship, especially in their romance in season 2. Mm-hmm. It's so well done, like so understated. The first time they sort of like, the first time they kiss, it's that transition from like just being friends to like being romantically involved. It almost happens without any words. The camera, there's like, it sort of zooms in on their hands, and they just hold hands and they walk.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can you describe the scene, because I don't specifically recall it.
So they're at the bar, and they're like playing pool, and Matt's sort of pretending to be blind, and Karen's like helping him.
She
like,
leans over him and stuff. Yeah.
And then Foggy, Foggy just being like the absolute like just abject like moral person that he is. He sees that, and he wants them to be happy, so he decides to go home early.
Just the guy from the Mighty Ducks all up in this scene for no reason, like.
The Mighty Ducks.
That's where Eldon Henson got his start. Have you seen the Mighty Ducks? He's one of the kids in the Mighty Ducks. That's how I know him.
Oh.
So when he turned up in Daredevil, I was like, this fucking guy.
But and then it starts raining, and she's like, do you mind the rain? He's like, no. And then they sort of hold hands, and then they walk to his place. And it's just this really like beautifully underplayed scene where there's hardly any dialogue. Like, it's all just performance. There's no like sensational, like, smooshing each other's faces in the rain, kind of kiss. It's just like very, just very understated, very subtle.
Yeah, it's the romance of two 30-year-olds, not two 20-year-olds, right? Like, and I think that's I'm gonna use the word difficult, but that's not quite what I mean. I think it's just like something we don't see that often. And it has a lot of nuance, and I guess that's probably like where like all of this show is in these quiet moments of like, maybe the word to say is like it's very it understands its own restraint and when to exercise it. And I think Everett and Goddard, like, that's sort of their special sauce, is like the restraint to not do the maneuver. When a different writer might do them, or even like a different, I'm not sure the structural apparatus of like their control over the filming and things like that. By season 2, the directors kind of change episode to episode. But
it certainly is like an uncharacteristic subtlety that for a superhero show. I haven't seen this anywhere else.
Yeah, neither. I guess that's what I'm driving at, is like it feels nuanced. Okay, can you give it? So I'm interested in this because I feel like you're going to do a better job of this than I would. Each season is different. Can you give us the like high level thematic is not quite the right word, but like what is each season about? Like, obviously we know narratively what they're about, but if you can give us the like season 1, season 2, season 3, this is kind of like the narrative stuff going on, and here's like existentially what it's about, because I mean this show is very interested in morals, as we've discussed. Can you give us the like the high level?
All right. I think the first season is there's this line that encapsulates what the first season is about, when Matt is talking to Claire, and he says, I've been doing this Daredevil stuff for a while now. No matter what I do, nothing is changing out there. If anything, like, it's getting worse. And the implication is that like, beating like your common criminals up as a vigilante, it doesn't make any change in the face of someone as powerful as Wilson Fisk, whose corruption just like seeps into like the farthest and most like complicated reaches of the city. This is hard to articulate. It's like it's actually very sort of like postmodern. There's this other scene where the reporter from the first season, Ben Urich, he meets with like this old mobster dude, and they have like this like sort of fun rapport relationship where they clearly have this history where this mobster dude would give Ben information about the world of crime, and Ben would sort of give him information about what the cops are doing and stuff, and the mobster guy says like things are changing out there. It used to be if you killed a man, you sent his wife flowers. Now they just send your wife with you. And it's I feel like it's very emblematic of like the kind of moral complexity that Matt has to deal with as opposed to what like Batman has to deal with, for example.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Perhaps a better example is like because I know a bunch of people just then were like, actually, Batman the Animated Series. I know. Batman the Animated Series is all about that. Perhaps a clearer example might be like a Moon Knight or something, where like the baddies are objectively baddies. Like it's. Yeah, there is a lot more, like, there's a delineation that keeps occurring where it's never quite clear. It's never quite clear if, like, Matt is doing the right thing ever when he's fighting these dudes. And I think season 1, like, is... Yeah, I mean, the shape of it is, like, he's trying to stop Fisk, but, like... what is he willing to sacrifice to do that? And it's really the David and Goliath story, like kind of as you stated. I keep talking. I can still hear you. Keep talking. I'll be back in like literally a second. Just I need to keep talk more about David and Goliath.
I need to turn on some lights.
Okay, we'll take a break. The quick cut.
You know, it reminds me a bit of No Country for Old Men.
Okay. So talk more about that.
So Tommy Lee Jones's character, you know, he gives that really sort of like profound speech at the end where he's like, oh, you know, I had that dream where I was riding alongside my dad, who, you know, who was also a sheriff, and I forget the details exactly, but pretty much he's very disturbed by this new world where he can't understand the motivations of the villains, who are just so dark, so bleak, so like inhumane, that it puzzles someone like him who's from this era of like just bad guys wanting money or something like that. And you get that same feeling with Matt Murdock, but it's a bit different because he's like, he can't. It's not an enemy that he can face and, you know, punch. It's this enemy who's just inhumane and ruthless. If he has a problem, he will just kill that person, all their family, everyone they care about. And it's just there's this really potent feeling of desperation that runs through the entire first season.
Desperation's a really good adjective. Like in every aspect of Matt's life. And there's that. I'm gonna misquote this, but there's that thing in the Bible of like, Saul on the road to Damascus and the intervention that he receives from God. And, you know, one of my favorite things about that intervention is there's a lot of contention about whether or not the people that he was traveling with heard God or not, right? Depending on the translation you read, depends on how you interpret whether or not, like, it was just for Saul or whether or not, you know, other people heard him. It's this contradiction in the Bible that just like hasn't been fixed and can't be fixed. And there's this exercise that some people have done to resolve both. So there is this like third group of people who sort of go, no, like both are true because the Bible is true and here is why. And they sort of explain away this fault. And what I think is interesting about the show's approach to Matt's position in, we'll say the world, but we mean like the MCU, right? Is when people are talking about that contradiction, the real work of actual Catholics who believe that the Bible is true and real, or who believe in the Bible is perhaps the correct way to say it, whatever the flavor that takes, is the true work of being a Catholic is sort of accepting the contradiction and living with the contradiction and sort of saying to yourself, yes, there can be contrary things in this book, but I'm here for the morality and I'm here for the this and the that. Like you identify things that keep you within that sphere of understanding, within that sphere of theology, right? And regardless of my personal feelings about religion and Catholicism and my interactions with it, you can't deny that the living with contradiction like that, or even just like being a modern Catholic or a modern Christian, must be fraught with contradiction, right? Like, most of science kind of disproves a lot of what's in those texts. And I think what's interesting about what we're talking about here, about like Murdoch and like his place in the universe of these stories that he's in, is like, it's not just that he's broke a lot of the time, it's that he's willfully broke. Like, he could just go and be a corporate lawyer and be rich and still be Daredevil, right? Like, he could do the Batman thing of like be a rich guy, and he would be better at being Daredevil because he'd have better resources. But there's this part of him that, like, it just cannot, the means never justify the method morally, but physically they always do. And there's that interesting juxtaposition in his character of like, he will beat a guy almost to death in pursuit of his morals, but he in pursuit of justice, or whatever you want to define what he does, but he will never corrupt his own soul because he knows there's no coming back. And I think the show is ultimately like about that, right? Like, by season 2 you get Frank Castle, who's a guy who just like is willing to shoot anybody if they're a baddie. Like, he just, and if you've watched The Punisher, which you should, the first season is excellent. Second season, hit or miss. First season, excellent. You know, there's a great scene, I don't know which season, I think it's season 1, maybe it's season 2, I can't remember, where he becomes friends with his like guy in the chair. I can't remember the guy's name, but he's like the guy in the chair in the lab. He becomes really close with the guy's wife. And there's this scene where they have like a few glasses of rosé together. And you get to see the human side of Frank Castle for the first time in a long time. And I think about that scene a lot when I talk about Daredevil, because Matt Murdock is never not in... This is going to sound ridiculous, but I'll explain myself. He's never not in the mode of having a glass of rosé with his friend's wife. He is always thinking about, what does this mean for my soul? What does this mean for the people around me?
Right.
But he's actively choosing so often to do things that he know will be actively harmful to those people, or they might disapprove of, because it's the right thing to do. And I think it's a really, like, I don't know, that's something that has always been a thought of mine when thinking about the show that I haven't really been able to articulate properly. Is like, he's so intensely interested in what the right thing is to do, but it's always for like the larger picture. It's never for him and the people around him necessarily. And he tries to do the right thing by his friends, but like, the right thing to do for his friends would be like, don't be Daredevil and be a better friend and partner, right? Like,
well, so yeah, there's like that. This show explores morality on a lot of different levels. So you got like, you know, the big picture morality about redemption, you know, human nature, good and evil, life and death. Like, that's the stuff that that's Matt's jam. He loves grappling with that shit. Then you got like morality within the scope of human law, you know, specifically American law for this show. But like, you know, justice, corruption, punishment, like, this stuff he seems pretty dead set on. Like, he seems to have a conviction about these things in his mind. And then you got social morality, which is, you know, like Matt trying to be an upstanding sort of moral person, and as well as being like just a good friend to Karen and Foggy. And that's an aspect that's Foggy brings a lot to the show in that aspect. Like, he's a great foil for Matt in that social morality scope, where he's such like a supportive like friend to both Matt and Karen. He's the definition of like that sort of morality, whereas Matt is more about, you know, morality in the law sense. But yeah, that's such an interesting contradiction. Another contradiction of Matt's character is how he's so he has such moral conviction when it comes to stuff like justice and the law, but in season 3 he just completely throws away his life and his relationships, which is, you know, a pretty immoral thing to do, but like, it's pretty you know, discompassionate. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. What do you think about, like, okay, so, because I think Foggy's place in the show is one of contention. For those of us that remember him from the Mighty Ducks, it's just weird to see him play this kind of role. But he is a really good foil for Matt. Talk me through, okay, so season 1, religious epic. I think we're pretty confident on that.
Yep.
Season 3 is... It's kind of like the Executioner's paradox, right? Where it's like... So Matt is in this position where... okay, let me backtrack. So, season 2, Matt re-engages with Elektra from his past, who works for... The Foot? No, is that right?
That's from the Ninja Turtles.
That's Ninja Turtles, damn it. Well, actually, no, fuck you, because here's a fun fact for you, Patrick. Don't know why I said fuck you so aggressively.
I think I know what you're going to say. There's a crossover between them.
Did you know? Well, not only that, but did you know that the ooze that blinds Daredevil is what creates the Turtles?
Yeah, I did know that.
But also, did you know that the Foot and the Hand are related organizations?
Yeah, I mean... I didn't know that, but that tracks. Sure.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Makes you think. Makes you think comics are dumb.
Oh damn.
Yeah, sorry. Comics are goofy and stupid. If you can't admit that, you're a fucking dweeb. And I love him. Okay, so
she's from the Chase, not the Hand.
Thank you.
Yeah. Which is
Stick's whole crew, right?
Right.
Right. So their whole thing is defeat the Hand.
Yeah, so the Hand is this like ancient organization. They're the Templars. They discovered immortality, and they're expansionists and dickhead conquerors. And the Chaste is there's this story about how the Hand massacred this whole village. This one boy survived, killed all the members of the Hand, and then there was like a religious uprising from this kid who was called the Chaste.
Got it.
And then they're perpetually at war.
It's Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed. So Elektra comes back into his life, and one of the interferences we get in this show, and that's what I'm going to probably use throughout, is the existence of the Defenders. So season 2 confronts us with Frank Castle, who is a character that does all of the stuff that Matt Murdock won't do to solve the problems Matt is trying to solve. Right? So Matt's whole thing is like, I don't do killing, right? He's got the Batman rule. Like I said earlier, they got that from somewhere. He doesn't want to kill people. Frank Castle only wants to kill people. It's the only thing he's good at. And we get Elektra as the avatar of that struggle, where Matt is trying to vie for the avatar of those two spectrums. He's trying to win her back to the side of not killing, against Frank Castle's side, which is obviously like do all the murders in the world, and she just can't change ultimately. What we get in the Defenders is we'll talk about it a lot when we watch it, but it's like 5 episodes or something, or 6. It's not that long.
I think it's 6. Yeah.
But it is the plot of the contemporary part of It, the book, like the adult It characters, without Pennywise, and they're fighting, the Hand or whatever, and Elektra is in the mix. And so what's interesting
this is an interesting comparison, but go on.
When we get to it, I can literally, like, they do the Chinese diner scene from the book almost blow for blow.
Oh, okay.
Like, the comparisons are not I'm not making this up for fun. It's to the point where, like, someone read it and went, yeah, that'll work. Like, it feels like that. They go down into the depths of the earth to fight a buried evil. Like, I'm not fucking around. This is just it. But again,
okay.
Like one of the people they thought they could trust betrays them and becomes psychotic and murderous. One of them pledges to stay behind to be buried alive. Like, it's just it again. They just did it. But anyway, my point here is that the Defenders becomes an interference because much like the Spider-Man films, the Marvel ones, and much like the Guardians films, they get two that they get to, the Guardians film specifically, they get two they get to do that are really concise and focused, and then the rest of the paratextual apparatus interferes, and then they're like, okay, what's the third one? I feel like Daredevil season 3 is kind of that, where they had to sit down and be like, what do we do now that this happened? And I guarantee that Bill Everett and Drew Goddard sat there and went, well, I don't know what we do now. Like, or was this always part of their plan? Who knows? Either way, season 2 ends up being this kind of story of Elektra representing the extent of the spectrum that Matt can control, and then obviously Karen and Frank and their relationship as she tries to sort of do acts of contrition on his behalf to believe that he's not that bad, because it kind of self-justifies the acts of Daredevil. Or so it justifies it in the road. It valorizes them in a particular way where it's like, Frank Castle's the worst of if Daredevil started killing people, he could still be forgiven and redeemed. And so I shall redeem the guy that is the worst version of him.
Yeah.
And then kind of with the interference with the Defenders, we then get like season 3, which is like, how would you describe season 3 of Daredevil? Because I really struggle, other than it's the problem with the first season, but just like it's just the first season again, but like juiced up and kind of made more condensed isn't what I mean. Concentrated. It's a more concentrated version of the first season.
Yeah, I don't know. It's all right. Well, I need some time to think about that season 3 question. But in regards to the Defenders, it's interesting how much legwork they do in the first season to seemingly set up season 2, as well as the Defenders, as well as like Iron Fist as well. Like they introduce Madame Gao, who's like a prominent figure in Iron Fist. It's and they give the whole thing the backstory with Stick in season 1. It's not relevant in season 1. However, it is extremely relevant in season 2, and then a lot of that stuff is also extremely relevant in the Defenders. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it was always part of the plan, honestly, because I mean, we could probably confirm this with some research, but I feel like the Defenders was always planned from the start. Mm-hmm. They probably didn't know what they were going to do to their character, to Matt. I imagine that when they got to season 3, they were like, we have to do the best that we can, and which they nailed it.
The commander wanted to meet this man who had won the respect of so many. He went to Gahichi, talked with him in his hut for many hours. Then he dragged him out in front of his village and hacked him to pieces, along with his entire family. In that man who took Gahichi's life, I saw the devil. So yes, Matthew, I believe he walks among us, taking many forms.
What if you could have stopped him from ever hurting anyone again?
One of the challenges that we have here is like, okay, so Jessica Jones, I really, really like as a show. Like, I really like it. Like, I think all 3 seasons are excellent. Luke Cage, equally excellent. Iron Fist, really hit and miss episode to episode. Like, to the point where, like, it it was really hard to do that episode of the Art for Artists podcast where we covered that show, because it has no idea what it wants to be. And something we've talked about already with like Daredevil is like it's so exacting in what it's trying to do. And you have to throw these all together and be like, what's an interesting story to tell? And I think The Defenders is almost really, really good, but it ends up being really, really bland. And I don't think there's no constituent parts that are the problem. It's the whole of the thing that doesn't work. And I think it's probably because like Daredevil as a character, as he's presented, he plays really well with Jessica Jones, right? Like they are tonally very similar. He plays...
Give me more of that.
Just any day of the fucking week.
Yeah.
He plays really, really well with Luke Cage because Luke Cage is like so straight up and down and has no time for this like, oh, but what if my soul is morally damned? Like no time for that. And I think the issue is the version of Danny Rand that we get is just like grading tonally to the project that these other things are doing. And so the result of that, I think, by the end of The Defenders is that, you know, obviously Matt gets buried under a fucking building. So here is my issue structurally with Matt's story, which I'm sure we will dote on throughout, is he gets buried under a fucking skyscraper, right?
Yeah.
He's making the ultimate hero sacrifice. He is doing the final act of contrition to make up for trusting Elektra, and to make up for defending her. He's making and for just being a daredevil, right? Like for just being the devil of Hell's Kitchen. He makes the ultimate act of contrition, and they are forced to kind of do the maneuver that we see in Avatar: The Last Airbender with Zuko, where they then have to reform him into like a new character. I have no problem with season 3. I think it's really compelling. I think it's really interesting. It's probably 2 episodes too long. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. But
I think every season of all the Defender shows are a couple episodes too long.
Yeah. Although I would say that like it's worth it in Luke Cage just for the absolute bangers of music they choose. Like that show is filled with absolute certified bangers of music. They have Charles Bradley perform in the club at one point. R.I.P. Rest in peace.
Oh yeah.
But like, what an absolute legend! And they just got him up there on stage in this. I bet he had no idea what was going on. He was like, "Yeah, I'll play," and it's awesome. Like what a great send off note for that man's incredible career and life. But yeah, there's something happening, I guess, like formally with that transition to season 3 where I'm talking around it because I don't know how to articulate it. That third season feels different.
You know, I feel like it's, you know, we talked about how like season 1 is like a religious epic, but season 3 it just turns it up to like 200% with like the religious like parallels. Like, you know, I mean, isn't it based on a comic called like Daredevil Born Again or something like that? But anyway, you know, there's you know,
so basically in the comic he yeah, it is. He basically throws out the suit and the persona and he just like starts again. In the comic, that's the suit that we see in season 1, which is the black just the black outfit that he has on.
Yeah.
Which is the face covering and the whatever. But you know, he realized that like the identity of Daredevil was like toxic to what he was trying to achieve, and it was becoming worse and worse and worse for his means and his ends, and also he's broke as shit, so he can't afford the suit. And yeah, it
was
is.
he renting it?
I think it's just like the upkeep and the material and stuff. I haven't read that comic in years, but yes, it is based on that. Yeah, maybe his lease on it ran out or something. I don't know.
Well, yeah, he might have been renting it from that dude in She-Hulk.
Who knows? Yeah, could have been.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so, you know, obvious Christ resurrection metaphor, like off the bat in season 3, right? And then you know, he spends like the majority of the season in a church, and he tries to like, you know, kill himself, and like it's just that's where all the most like compelling stories are, right? Like a character, you just beat them down until you just have like the bare bones of their actual like character left. That is where you get the most interesting, most compelling stuff. You know, it sucks for the character, but it's compelling. I'll tell you what.
Yeah, they're not a person, so something can't technically be bad for them because they're made up.
Still feel bad.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, if I had gotten up to season 3, I might have more to say about it. But from what I remember, that is the most salient point about season 3, is just like what happens when you completely lose your identity. What happens when you are willing to give up everything to do what you think is right, to, you know, for your conviction.
Yeah, I guess it's not that I think it's tricky. He doesn't give up his identity. He divests his identity into Daredevil. Like because I don't know. Yeah, like he goes like, this is who I am now. It's not that he gives up Matt Murdock. It's that he divests Matt Murdock into the project of Daredevil.
Into the project of Daredevil. Yeah, it's something I've been working on just on the side.
Just on the side, yeah.
I haven't been ready to show it
It's
yet.
a monthly subscription service. Okay, so I guess let's quickly talk about, you know, what we're hoping to get out of this, you know, experience, and then we'll wrap up for episode 0. So, you know, you came to me with this idea. We've talked about Daredevil a lot. Like, what are you kind of hoping to come out of this? Like, what do you think will end up?
You know, online discourse for media nowadays, speaking to, you know, your sort of mission statement with ZeroIndent, it's a lot of it is hyper-critical, like really detail-oriented focus on superhero media, which is, you know, like that's fine. Like everyone, it's popular. A lot of people like it, you know, for good reasons. But at some point, I end up thinking like, you know, like there's so much other stuff. Like there's so much good stuff coming out all the time. Mm-hmm. If you don't limit yourself to like this kind of stuff, it's, you know, imagination is probably better spent elsewhere. But, you know, if you insist on really like hypercritically analyzing superhero shows, I think this one is worth it. And maybe I would hope that this show can maybe set an example for like for the, you know, what superhero shows should be aiming for. You know, we didn't talk about it, but I want to sort of pitch my fanfic of another season of Daredevil.
I should have up top that. The way this series is going to wrap up, I think timing wise, we should be able to do this before Born Again commences, which is in 2024. They said mid 2024. The final episode of our initial part of the show, before that show comes out, is Pat is going to pitch his prospective season 4 of Daredevil, which I am very excited
and
about.
I guess this will give you like an insight into what like my taste and what I think good storytelling is in my mind.
Right. Can we get a sizzle? Like, can you? Is there anything you can sizzle? Can you give us a sizzle of some of the script without spoiling anything?
So I think, you know, speaking to beating Matt Murdock down, you know, to a pulp, I want to make him suffer more. I think make the setting in the blip.
Oh no!
And I think take away Foggy. He's gone.
Oh no!
But keep Karen around.
That's
because
even worse.
I think I know exactly. You know, if you take by the way, in this scenario, like Karen and Matt are like, you know, still like dating,
romantically involved.
Yeah, romantically involved. If you take away someone's romance, you know, that's cliche. Like, yeah, they'll grief, and it gives, you know, because usually it's like, you know, male protagonists, right? Like, you know, having dead wives and stuff. And that always gives them an
trope, the fridging.
Yeah, the frozen wife or something.
Yeah.
But it always gives those male protagonists reasons to be violent and, like, you know, act out. Whereas if you make Foggy the one that disappears and Karen stays around, it compels him to have a normal life and to keep going, right? But taking away Foggy, it's like, you know, sort of like the moral support, the moral like center that Matt didn't know he had until he lost Foggy would be like such a heartbreaking like bit of drama. I think
that sounds incredible. I'm
Yeah.
I'm already stoked. That sounds fucking amazing. Yeah.
And you better believe Jessica Jones is going to be in it, and the villain is Luke Cage.
Heck yeah. That... I'm in. I will do anything with and for Jessica Jones, so I'm all the way signed up. That's a bit of sizzle if you stuck around this long. Look, okay, so next week I already closed my document. Okay, we're covering the first 3 episodes. I say week, I always do that reflexively. Next episode of this show, we are covering Daredevil season 1, episodes 1, 2, 3. So if you want to watch those in preparation, you can do. And we will be analyzing them. I think the general approach is going to be like, we'll do a season kind of sequentially. So we're going to record every fortnight. I'm going to probably release them every fortnight. Probably take a bit of a break, do the special kind of into season stuff, and then come back and then probably do like a fortnight schedule again. So we're aiming to be relatively consistent, but as we said in kind of part of that mission statement, you know, we want to make sure that we give a show the bandwidth it deserves, and we let life do its thing if that does happen. And I am going to give Patrick one of my fill lights that I'm looking at right now that I'm not using. So
I was going to say, hopefully as the weeks go on, I'll improve my setup. I just recently moved into this place, and I didn't realize it was going to be this
It's
dark.
in flight. That's okay. I'm getting new lights delivered literally tomorrow or Tuesday. So you can have one of my old ones. So at least you're a lit up boy for the show, for the visual listener who likes to look at our mugs for some fucking reason. But look, this is going to conclude episode 0 of of Daredevil in the Details. There's no "the" in front of it. I felt like that would be superfluous. I've just kept it to Daredevil in the Details. Patrick, any thoughts before we close out? Any last words? That sounds like something grim's about to happen.
You're holding a gun. Any last words?
Any last words, Pat? Or anything you want to bring up before we wrap up?
No, I'm excited.
I'm so excited. For contrast, Darth will probably do this. Play this moment against like the end of the first episode of the Sherlock show. I'm so excited to do this. Like, I so rarely get to do projects about stuff I like. So I'm so stoked to do this. So join us for episode 1 next time. We'll be covering the first 3 episodes, Into the Ring, Cutman, and Rabbit in a Snowstorm. We're really, really keen to get into this project. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really interesting. Before we wrap up properly, where can people find you on the internet? You know, do this. I know we've already done it, but like for just in case people have forgotten, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find A Method to the Madness on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. We have a website, AMTTM.com, where you can find our all the links to all our socials from there.
Love it. This has been a part of that digression collection, which is A Method to the Madness. You can find me all across the internet at ZeroIndent. You can find my books at underink.press. That's really weird muscle memory to try and remember. Underink.press. And if you're consuming this on like a podcast catcher or like a YouTube, wherever you find it, do all the things you guys know to do. Give it a like, give it a subscribe, give it a review, give it a rating, whatever. It really does help the show out, helps people find it. We do appreciate the heck out of it. We will catch you next time for episode 1. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I don't have a sign off for this show yet. Let's quickly workshop one. Normally I have something pithy to say at the end that's like kind of thematically relevant.
Let's do the PewDiePie. Bye.
Absolutely not. That's too contemporary for me. You made me feel a million. What can we do? I feel like it has to be something related to like Fogwell's gym or like what is it like? You know, in the first episode, you know, my dad always got up where he could take a punch or something. It has to be related to that. You know. Like it has to be.
The Murdoch boys always get back up.
There you go. That's my sign off. There you go. You did it in one.
The Madness boys always get back up.
I wouldn't redraft the thing that worked. I feel like you made it far worse. That's not bad actually. Yeah. Okay. We're doing it. We're doing that.
I feel like you said the same thing about the title.
Yeah, but then I was like, I can't do any better, so like, don't at me, like, come on. Yeah, hang on. So the Method Boys always get back up, or the Method Boys can take a punch. What is the dialogue in the show? Like, what's the thing that he says about his dad? He's like, my dad always got back up. Like, is that what he says?
I can't. He says to his dad at one point, "We're Murdochs. We always get back up."
Okay, then I think the sign off is. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We're the Method Boys. We always get back up.